Well, it's beyond 12 trillion because the commitment now, according to the Inspector General for the United States government for that particular subject, it's 23.7 trillion that we're committed for. And so by raising the short-term debt limit, $1 trillion, $2 is inconsequential in the scheme of things. And you got to remember, if you take all the off-budget items and the things that are guaranteed to American citizens, the debt is really over $100 trillion already. And that was before this 2-year fiasco that we just entered into 2 years ago. And so it'll be approved. It's not going to affect much of anything. And they just keep on spending money, and they'll overcome deflation until a point is reached where we have hyperinflation, and then people are going to stop borrowing. And when that happens, we'll go into deflationary depression, and then the whole thing will collapse. And it will collapse, and there's no way around it.
So do you see this, let me ask you then, speaking of the collapse, do you see this being more of an Argentina collapse or a Weimar Republic where a Hitler can come out and rule over everybody?
Well, I don't know. You don't know until you get there. If I had to say which it would be now, I'd have to opt for the Argentina version. And but that doesn't mean it won't go beyond that. I mean, that's
right.
Possible. And we could become Weimarized, as it's called. And I lived in Germany for a long time, and so I'm very familiar with the history of the Reichsmark and the fact that Hitler was born at Versailles. And the reason why is they laid all these reparations on Germany, which they couldn't pay. They printed money, and the economy collapsed. They had a depression during the 20s, and most people don't know it, but they had about 250 private armies in Germany during that period, and one of the smaller groups were the brown shirts, and that eventually became the Nazi Party, and they rose to power. And they rose to power because they were financed from New York and London and Paris, and that's how Adolf Hitler came to power. And so that sort of thing could happen in America. Very possible. But I think we're going to go into the Argentinian version first.
Right, I can see that. KT, any other questions we can answer for you, sir?
One more brief one, thank you. In the Great Depression, there was a crash of 1929, and then that led out for several years thereafter. Is a possible milestone that we have that is similar the drop in the Dow Jones of last October?
Well, the Dow Jones dropped, and the reason it came back is the Federal Reserve poured money into the economy, and that money went into the market, and it went into other places as well, banks, brokerage firms, etc. And so we have a market that's been created out of make-believe money that was created mostly out of thin air. I mean, 73% of the trades in the New York Stock Exchange are black box trades. In other words, they just trend followers using algorithms. And so really there's not very much trading of a creative nature going on. And so the market will go down. It'll test 6,600 on the Dow again, and it eventually will break it and go lower. And if it stops in 4,000, we're going to be lucky. And we're going to have a dollar. The USDX right now is 79. It'll go to 71.18, and the next stop after that is down to 40 or 50. And that's when they'll officially devalue the dollar, and they'll devalue other currencies as well, and they'll revalue some currencies, and then there will be a debt settlement among nations. And all of that is in the future. And you wonder why they've got internment camps. They're pulling these scams of this swine flu epidemic. They want total power over the people. And anybody that can't see that is just dumb. I mean, it's so, when I started talking about this 50 years ago, people thought it was absolutely insane, and there was nothing to back it up. Today, they're doing it right in front of our eyes.
All right.
Thank
Anything
you,
else for us, KT?
No, sir. Thank you.
All right. Pleasure having you on. Let's move to Tampa. We have Marge from Tampa on the line with us here. Marge, you with us?
How you doing, Bob? Yep, I'm here. Can
Okay.
you hear me? Yeah. How you doing, Bob?
Fine, thank you.
Bob? Okay. Hi. I had a question. We had a previous guest on our show, and he stated that there's a general feeling that the Chinese are ready to dump our bonds, and that will collapse our financial system within 30 seconds when they do this. And they're currently in Washington right now, basically knocking on our door saying, where's our money? And he's saying this is why, this is a constant reason Geithner is going to China. Do you see any truth in that statement?
Yes and no. I think you have to understand that China is not stupid, and they went into this World Trade Organization, and they went into exporting tremendous amounts of goods, not only to the United States, but to the rest of the world, and they have over $2 trillion in foreign exchange. Now, they knew that other currencies were going to devalue. They just didn't want them to devalue in a very large way, which has happened to their biggest position, which is the dollar. And part of the problem with what they've done is that during that period of time that they made all this money, they were manipulating their currency to their advantage. And so there was no free trade in this globalization. It was unfair trade. And so they are not going to bomb the dollar. They may be sellers, but they're not going to do it to the extent that they're going to be responsible for knocking the dollar down. It just isn't in their best interest. And so I don't think you're going to see that unless something extraordinary happened. And they know that the dollar's going down, and they're just going to have to live with it. And they've lost a lot of money doing it. But their nation went from a 2 to a 7 on a scale of 10 because foreign markets were open to them, which were never open before. And they still are using slave labor. And they still do have 30 million people unemployed who were employed 2 years ago. And that market they've been selling to is getting smaller and smaller because of the World Depression, and it's not going to get better. And the only reason their economy is going to grow 9.5% this year is they just injected $2 trillion into their economy in a very short period of time. And the result has been most of it hasn't gone into the economy. It's gone into housing, which has gone up about 50% in value, and the stock market went up 82%. And now the government's got to slow it all down and reverse it. And when they do that, they're going to get even more unemployment. So China's got its own set of problems, believe me. And they're not going to be big dollar sellers. They will be sellers, but they're not going to be big dollar sellers. But it's going to go down anyway, because everybody and his brother, well, let me put it this way. Of all the nations in the world that hold foreign reserves, 64.5% of their foreign reserves are in U.S. dollars. They're all stuck.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for us, Marge?
Oh, yeah. They're all, what was the last two words you said? They're all stuck. They're all what? The last two words he said? They're all...
Bob, are you still with us?
The nations of the world, their foreign exchange reserves, 64.5% are in U.S. dollars. So everybody's stuck. They're all going to suffer.
Okay.
And so if the dollar goes to 40, they're all going to lose 2/3 of what they had in dollars. And the dollar's not going to be the only currency going down. There'll be others. And so there's going to be a big meeting like there was in the Smithsonian Institute in the early 70s, the Plaza Hotel in Paris in 1985, and they're going to get together and say the euro is going to be so much against the dollar, and the euro is going to be so much against the Danish krona, and on and on and on. And they're going to make up these combinations of increases and decreases in the value of currencies, and they're going to have a debt settlement worldwide. And that's what I think they're headed for. But when that happens, many of these nations are going to blow sky high, not only the United States, and governments are going to be overthrown, many of them. And that's why, you talk about sending foreign troops to America. Forget it.